Great, we should be recording. Welcome to Gold Finals, everyone, of the Hart House Prep and Training Competition 2024. Thank you all for coming, and congratulations to our 4 teams for breaking to Gold Finals. Huge congratulations, very excited for the round that's to come. Before we do get started with anything else debate related, I would like to ask for introductions, including name, team position, or speaker position, preferred pronouns, optional, from each speaker in the round. So we'll go in the usual OG chronological order. So starting with OG.
Eileen Kuang, speaking first on OG. Any pronouns, please.
And speaking second, Andy Sun, he, him.
Awesome. OO.
Speaking first on OO, my name is Kallie. My pronouns are she, her.
Speaking second on OO, Omkara, pronoun she.
Thanks so much. CG.
Speaking first for CG, Sam Lee, he, him pronouns, please.
Speaking second on CG, lisun, she, her, please.
Thank you. And CO.
Speaking first on CO, Joshua Kwon, he, him pronouns.
Speaking second on CO, Hilda Lee, she, her pronouns, please.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And now I'll have my panelists introduce themselves in order of swankiest haircut.
Oh, who has the swankiest haircuts? We had a little bit going on behind the scenes, but hello. It says William, but I guess for this tournament I will be Wandy. I got conscripted last minute, and thus I'm delaying my date nights. You guys are lucky.
Hi, my name is Brenden. I use he, they pronouns, but please refer to the panel as a whole. Unlike William, I'm giga single and so dedicated that I don't have date nights to delay for this. So good luck, everybody.
Thank you to my panelists, and my name is Silin. I use she, they pronouns, and I too am very, very excited to be judging you guys. All right. I don't think we have to go through our usual set of housekeeping, given that this is finals and you all have had at least 4 rounds of experience of this. So we're going to go right into it. I'm also going to assume that if no objections are raised, everyone is okay with self-timing or timing through your own means, so like phone, stopwatch, etc. If anyone does require timekeeping, please feel free to let us know. If not, I will just I'll let you guys take care of the timekeeping so that we can track the round as thoroughly as possible. With that being said, I now invite the Prime Minister up to the stand to open up the debate for no longer than 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Here.
Okay, great. Verbal POIs, please. My time will begin on my first word. Panel, war shouldn't exist on a multitude of levels, principally and practically, but today we're settling for autonomous robots to be used instead. My speech today will prove why this is necessarily better for humanity. So proud to propose. Doing a few things in this speech for you today then. First, my model. Second, on some preemption and just framing in general. Third, on my constructive material about net harm. First, on the model then. Autonomous robots are defined as moving and operating on their own, and thus they will not require human controlling on the battlefield. They will not require any sort of human control or active control. And this is something that will, and specifically then, we're talking about a debate that is a this House prefers motion, right? So this is something that will change and is not a retrospective motion because autonomous robots will only exist after a society is quite advanced, for example, in the 21st century. And furthermore, there will also just be guidelines and codes of war, right? There are still going to be international guidelines of what is a correct society. And so you can't, for example, have robots that fire missiles to target civilians specifically or targeting governments, right? And so we also have the fiat to say that this will be implemented fairly correctly. A couple of pieces of setup then on terms of preempting what OP might tell us. First, why does the frequency of war not severely increase on our side or change at all? There's a big stigma specifically then on the symbolic barrier of war that is not just tied to the loss of human life. It isn't simply that we lose humans, that we lose soldiers, this is bad. There's a lot of stigma and there's a lot of big bad perceptions of the concept of war. So when this is even if this is replaced by robots, even if this is marginally less personal, people are still likely to remember things like World War II, the Holocaust, things like that. Nations will still receive huge criticism for going into war and expending their resources like this. And there are also still massive incentives to continue good international relations and economic relations. Second, then, why is AI not likely to take over the world? On either side of the house, AI development is going to happen. We will eventually reach a point where AI is more competent on either side of the house. This doesn't exactly matter. And when technology and AI is involved in war, this is just now very high stakes. This is not an incentive for people to necessarily take over the world with AI then. Okay, on my constructed material and some framing, why does war exist, or why does war occur on both sides? I think war generally happens when there are major disagreements between two nations or two groups. And so one side has things to gain, or either side has things to gain or things to lose. And this can be economic or idiosyncratic or just symbolic, right? And I think there are a few very intuitive ideas as to why we don't want humans to be fighting these types of wars. First constructive then on PTSD and having less civilian targets, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's very difficult, first of all, in terms of mechanization, for past veterans to get jobs. There's a lot of trauma, right, associated with war, and it's just extremely difficult to fight a war for these individual soldiers. And so there are extreme detriments to mental health, their families, and specifically then, after these soldiers come back from war, this damage is not short-term. People don't go to war and come back fine. The effects and trauma of war extends into the people they interact with, as well as themselves and the people they love. Thus, society as a whole suffers when countries go to war. Society as a whole civilians specifically are suffering because a country goes to war. And this looks like, for example, hospital workers being traumatized because they've been on the battlefield, they've seen horrible things, or families being broken up. There's a lot of propaganda, et cetera, et cetera. Second, then, on having less war crimes. I think this is also very intuitive, right? Because less resources going towards innovating new ways to commit crimes against humanity is pretty good, I think. I think if we have less reasons to think of better ways to kill people, better ways to commit crimes against humanity, I think ultimately we have a better society. And the characterization here is very simple. When a country goes to war, all resources are diverted into winning the war. And thus, all this technology, all their resources, all their money is going towards developing war weapons, going towards developing bombs, missiles, tanks, etc. And so the impact here is that retrospectively, perhaps, atomic bombs, tanks, and other militia will either not exist, or they will cease to exist, or exist at a much less advanced degree than they do now. Then I'll just talk about my last kind of constructive point on the idea that smaller countries are able to defend themselves to a greater extent or much easier, because countries with inherently smaller populations than the status quo face zero chance against larger populations. I.e., if Barbados goes against of like China, for example, obviously this is not very realistic. It's unlikely for smaller countries to have any chance against countries that inherently have a larger population, i.e. smaller armies are losing armies. Whereas with technology, there's at least a chance that these smaller countries are able to have a chance against these larger nations. For all these reasons, so proud to propose OG ballot.
I thank the speaker for those fine remarks. I now call upon the Leader of Opposition to open up their case. You're here.
Okay, my speech begins now. Okay, today in my speech, I will be first characterizing autonomous robots and then moving on to my three constructives on classism, violence, and something else. Okay, so first then, characterization. We think that what an autonomous robot actually looks like is it's essentially a very, very powerful soldier who was just born. Like it cannot die in the sense that humans can, but it can be destroyed. It would obviously be armed. It doesn't have emotions or morals, and it follows orders, but only to a certain extent. Presumably, robots will be fed information that incentivizes them to fight. I think we can assume this given that if these autonomous robots weren't incentivized to fight, then this motion wouldn't be feasible, which is like that's a part of the motion. So anyway, essentially, this robot is like a child who was just born and then fed a lot of war propaganda so that they're incentivized to fight. And lastly, presumably, these robots cost a lot of money to make. Okay. Then, first constructive on classism. We think that obviously countries who have more money are going to be able to produce more robots and more technologically advanced ones too. And because of this, rich countries with better technology and a larger army are very, very likely to win the majority of wars. Examples being America and China and Japan. And what this will do is it will push down developing or poor countries even more, right? At least in the status quo, these countries have a chance, which maybe they just have like a greater population, or maybe they can team up with other ones. Like for example, how North Vietnam was able to defeat America in the Vietnam War. However, with this motion, developing countries are going to be unable to develop autonomous robots, or at least ones that can contend with some of the most advanced weaponized automations. They don't have the money to fund the construction nor to fund the development of technology. And other countries probably wouldn't be very interested in collaborating with them, right? Like most countries would be pretty happy to collaborate with the US and potentially receive its support in the future, but probably fewer countries would want to ally with an unknown developing country. So this then means that wealthier and more robot-y countries can do whatever they like to developing countries without risk of revolt or pushback. They can exploit them for their resources, labor, products, etc. And these developing countries won't be able to stop it, knowing that if they were to start a war, they would probably lose because of their inferior resources. And it's safe to say that no one wants just one government or a small elite group of government to control the whole world, right? As that would turn the world into a dictatorship. Okay, second point then on violence. We think that robot soldiers are more likely to be violent than humans. Humans have a moral conscience, right? And as such, they may be willing to spare the lives of civilians who are uninvolved in the conflict. Two reasons. First, humans just sympathize with other humans. For example, they might not want to kill a child. Yeah, and reason two is they might just want to save energy. Like humans might not see the point in chasing down this one child just so you can kill them. Meanwhile, robots, on the other hand, have no incentive at all to spare lives, whereas presumably their military leader has offered some sort of incentive to make them fight. So obviously the robot would choose to kill anyone in their path in an effort to win the war, right? They don't have morals, and they don't really need to save energy, right? So they're more likely to do whatever it takes in order for them to win the war. And again, presumably military robots will be equipped with very dangerous weapons, which become increasingly dangerous as technology grows. So the obvious impact here is the harm on citizens. We think that there will be far more citizens' casualties on side government's world. But how does this compare with the deaths of human soldiers that occur on our side? Well, we think that on a principle level, we think it's unjust. No, we think that it's unjust for innocent human civilians who are completely disconnected to the war, who never signed up for violence, to be killed. Obviously, we think it's bad for soldiers to die too, but at least they know what they're getting themselves into. Soldiers know they could die in action, and many of them are okay with that. Many of them are fighting for something that they believe in, and they've chosen that their country's interests come before their personal lives. Whereas citizens have not made this choice, and as such, it's not fair for us to kill them. Okay, but fine, say that you don't buy that more civilians die on side government. But if you don't buy that, then you have to concede that wars on government will drag on for longer. So the goal of a war is to resolve some type of conflict between two governing bodies, right? And each side wants to persuade the other to do what they want by generally by killing so many of them that their government, who is really sad to see other people die, their government finally runs and say, okay, fine, we'll do whatever you want. And that's how wars typically end in the status quo, right? Through violence and through the loss of human lives. However, governments on side government, yeah, have less of an incentive to end wars because there aren't any significant casualties, right? No soldiers are dying because they're all robots, and few civilians are dying, apparently, and any robots that are destroyed can just be repaired, right? So there's not much of an incentive to ever end a war until your demands are met. And because of that, wars will drag on for longer. And the impact of that is that it becomes more of a competition between who can financially outlast the other by repairing their robots and inventing new technology. And again, this ties back as another mechanism to our first point that in this world, countries with less resources will be likelier to lose wars to wealthy countries. Okay, on that basis, so proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for those fine remarks. I now call upon the DPM to continue their case. Here.
Okay, pronouns are he, him, and I will take POIs verbally. I'll not be checking the chat. Okay. Time starts. First word. 3, 2, 1. I think we as humans like to think of ourselves as moral creatures who don't want to commit war crimes and do horrible things. But in the heat of the moment in war, when your life is in danger, people inevitably result in doing horrible things, and this severely damages people. That is why war is so deeply traumatic, even though we intuitively understand that it's not very good. Then I think that O probably falls out of this round when they have a naive characterization. Couple of things I'll do in this speech then. I'll first talk about the main opening clash and what actually happens in wars, and like what the actual impacts and who gets involved. Then secondarily, I want to preempt some stuff that I think is probably good material to run, but that might come out of closing. Okay, what do we hear out of OO then and what happens in wars? They say that first of all, rich countries and big countries will win wars more. No, if they listen to Eileen's speech, they know that we already preempted this, right? The reason is very simple. Smaller countries have far more capacity and incentive to build up technology bases, right? So yes, on both sides of the house, like bigger countries inherently have an advantage, right? But smaller countries under our side are able to make up for this difference far easier, right? It's far easier for you to build a factory and innovate and have some really smart AI engineer that just comes up with a really like good model of robots than you literally like trying to fight against the Chinese army when China has like 60 times more people than you, right? So these types of differences in the status quo is like far harder to catch up in. We say it's probably impossible. Rather, smaller countries have far more capacity and incentive to build up their technology base, right? Also note that like in the status quo, smaller countries like don't have an incentive to build up their military, right? Because like you have to focus on building up the economy, right? However, in the counterfactual, if wars are also fought with robots, this probably aligns with their technological development. So a lot of their technological development probably translates over to this. So in general, I think that we probably flip this point. The second thing they say that is that wars become more violent because robots become like they have like less morals, right? First of all, look at the status quo, right? I don't think wars are very like moral on either side of the house. You might want to claim this in a vacuum. You like that's a perfect world. Sure, I love to live in that. But I think that in the status quo, war crimes are happening like every day in Ukraine. Look at how many hospitals are being bombed in like Israel right now, right? Like if this is a robot versus comparatively, if this is a robot versus robot war, a war robot's goal is to kill other robots, not humans, right? Because by killing civilians, they're not actually like addressing or winning the war anymore, right? In the status quo, the reason why you might want to bomb a hospital or something is because you think that human fighters are hiding in there. This is not true for robots, right? The second thing then is we already preempted this when we talked about why AIs won't take over the world and why robots are probably going to have some sort of moral built into them. Why? Because on either side of the house, AI development will happen, right? We will eventually reach a point where AI is more competent than humans. Rather, what changes then, or what's the difference, is how AI developers go about it and how this is built. Currently, in the status quo, the stakes are very low, i.e. ChatGPT is just a tool. It doesn't present any severe harm to humans aside from like replacing some jobs, right? However, when technology and AI is involved in wars, this is very high stakes. When you're equipping technology with very dangerous weapons, then there's far more of an incentive for you to make sure that this technology doesn't get out of hand. So what you're going to see is that far more like incentives for governments to like cooperate internationally to make sure that this technology is developed in ethical ways. That because now robots present a severe risk to humans, right? I think that people prioritize the existence of your species over the like your country winning, right? I think that there's probably going to be a lot of cooperation and ensuring that AI robots actually really value human lives and don't go off the rail and start killing a lot of civilians. I think we're also able to flip this then. Okay, so what do we actually tell you? I think our case is very simple. Wars are literally just like less severe, right? Because like currently in the status quo, like thousands of people die in these wars. That's already very severe on a level of magnitude. But even people who don't die, wars have a severe impact like on a broad scale, right? You have things like PTSD, you have things like people being displaced, you have things like massive economic harms, etc., right? And I think that the just like preventing this is good. Okay, just to preempt some things then, I think that the frequency of war doesn't actually increase significantly, right? Because we already told you a couple of things. First of all, there's still massive incentives to keep good international relations and prevent things from escalating to the point of a war, right? Because because like things like trade relations and just peace and having more allies just inherently benefits both sides of the party. So countries probably want to keep their trade relations. They want to be able to buy more things. They want to be able to have peace and stuff like that. So they probably don't want to get into wars. They don't want to escalate, right? But also like war is still very inconvenient in this world because like AI robots are very expensive, like O characterizes. You don't want to lose them pointlessly, but also like people become displaced, the environment becomes damaged, people lose their homes. Like governments still probably don't want to wishy-washy support this types of warfare, right? So for all of these reasons, we're able to save far more human lives, which is the most important impact in this round. Value human life, side with OG.
I thank the speaker for those fine remarks, and I'll call upon the DLO to close out the front half. Here.
Okay, my time will start on my first word. Wars are only meaningful insofar as they kill people. It is awful, but it is the truth. Without the possibility of your loved ones dying, people oftentimes don't care. Few things in the speech. Firstly, some framing, and then actually no framing, sorry. And then I'm just going to structure my speech with 3 questions with integrated refutation and rebuilding. Okay, so the first question is, which side gets more human casualties? Side government tells you that when you have human-to-human fighting, you get a lot more civilian casualties. Okay, we agree that, of course, many soldiers are going to die in the wars, but we do think that far less civilians die, right? Especially in the wake of the numerous tragedies that have happened in our past, no government has an incentive to kill civilians, right? It is immoral, it is very likely to receive significant public backlash, and it is likely to get them voted out of power. Furthermore, no soldier has an incentive to kill civilians. No soldier wants to look another human being in the eye, see them suffering, and choose to kill them anyways. Side government acknowledges this when they talk about the PTSD that like wars bring to soldiers, right? They also told you that there are war crimes against civilians on our side of the house too. I think while this is true, these civilian deaths we think that they're like somewhat inevitable, and we think that they would be much worse on the other side of the house because like if there's war crime, if governments are like committing some kind of war crimes on our side of the house, that just means they are more likely to commit it on the other side of the house because because there's less of a risk in their minds of human casualty, right? They think less about the fact that these robots could kill people. So we are at least able to prevent some number of civilian deaths because on our side, there aren't any robots who mindlessly kill civilians, right? Because that's exactly what you're building. You're building a killing machine. A robot might consider it strategically I'll take it in a minute, actually. Might consider it strategically advantageous to kill civilians, since then you can starve the other side of potential workers who boost the economy. So robots do have an incentive to kill civilians just because they can. But no normal human soldier would actually think this way, right? We've already weighed the loss of soldier lives on to the loss of civilian lives on government, and there's far more incentive for and then they also tell you that there's more incentives for governments to ethically develop technology. However, why would you even risk it in the first place, right? If there's such a huge risk that you acknowledge on your side of the house, why would you even risk it? You cannot train an emotionless being that they should care about the loss of life. If you are emotionless, there is no way for you to develop emotions and develop empathy for another life. I'll take your POI.
Our framing was that AI development will happen on either side of the house. So you'll eventually have AI that are emotionless or whatever. On our side, we place far more stakes into making sure that these robots are actually ethical because they actually present a severe impact now.
I think I understand you, Pia. I think, whether or not AI is going to happen in the long run, I think the benefits we've presented to you, we want to save more lives in the short term as well. Either way, these regulations are probably going to happen in the future versus in the present. Like, we don't think humans are going to be like in the future suddenly like, oh, let's make dangerous AI and not check them. I don't think that's going to happen. Okay, so I think we win this first class of human casualties on sheer magnitude. The second clash is which side gets more war, right? We think that the end of war is fairly contingent on casualties in the status quo. A lot of wars end simply because countries recognize that a lot of my soldiers are dying, I'm losing a lot of territory, whatever it is, so they want to sign a peace treaty, whatever, the end. We don't think that on their side of the house there's going to be we think if you don't really care about the robots and their end and they just keep fighting forever, you don't really necessarily care about when the war ends. We think that the war has a much higher possibility to just go on forever and ever, or for a significantly longer amount of time, right? If you're just having two metal things just locked in a room fighting, governments don't necessarily care how long that goes on for, as long as they're continually locked in a battle. Okay. Thirdly, then, on who is actually likely to win these wars. Now, side government tells you that smaller countries have a greater incentive to build technology. Honestly, we just don't buy this. If you are a developing country and have barely enough food to feed some of your citizens, there's a very low chance that anyone is going to have the capacity to build robots rather than working towards finding their next meal. Also, research and development costs a buttload of money. Where are they going to be getting it from, right? It is like very unlikely that like smaller countries are going to be able to build this technology. We think that it's going to remain relatively similar to the status quo. The countries who are able to build weapons on our side are the same countries who are going to be able to build robots. Okay. Also, just a last piece of refutation. They also talk about war being criticized on like both sides of the house, and they bring up the example of the Holocaust. The entire point of like the fact that that World War II and the Holocaust is so remembered as one of the worst human rights abuses is just that. It's a human rights abuse, right? It was humans treating other humans terribly. We don't think that autonomous warfare is going to have the same effect, right? It's not going to be the most present idea in civilians' minds until it actually does come like physically close to them. So for these reasons, because on SideGov, you get more human casualties, you get more war, and you get like a lot like countries unable to defend themselves winning these wars. For these reasons, I'm so proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for those fine remarks. I now call upon the member of government to open up the back half. You're here.
Okay. PIs in chat, please. Or actually, if you would like raise your hand in Zoom, or I don't know, turn on your camera. You don't have to do that, but raise your hand works. Okay. Oh, also before I begin, I did promise Andre I would win this for him, so I feel like it's in the incentive of the panel to give us the win because Andre's mental health is probably very important. Okay, but anyways, so that's my first word. Panel, here's how CG is going to win this round. Firstly, we're going to A, wash out Op's claim on there being longer and more wars, breaking the deadlock and opening about casualties. Then B, we're going to present a vertical extension on why there actually is a reduction in casualties, fill in the holes that OG missed. And then C, run an independent fact to explain why the spillover effects of investment is the mechanism you should really weigh this round on. On more wars, then, I want to know at the very top and just put into perspective how expensive robots and autonomous fighters are. Like, dude, an F-35 is already like $100 million, plus like the billions of dollars it costed to like develop the production lines, etc., etc. Think about how much it would actually cost to build a fully autonomous version of this plane and make it feasible to use in combat and keep up the production on a large scale. And very notably, these robots are going to likely to be like dying very fast because you're essentially just trading robots with each other, right? Because you want to take out as many enemy forces as possible. I think the conclusion here is very simple. Governments are heavily disincentivized to actually start war on the rest of the house, and probably more than the status quo because of its monetary cost. And optically, it's so incredibly bad because this money has to come from somewhere. So when you're constantly in a tax deficit because you're putting all your money in industrialization, in your plane fighting, plane construction, whatever, robot construction, that probably doesn't look good. This is also why like OG's claims on smaller countries being able to win is probably not true, just because the huge amounts of capital that you actually need to put into these things to actually create a functional army. Okay, extension then. Here's why we actually think autonomous robots are going to cause less deaths. It's not like OG characterized. It's not the fact that you're sending less soldiers to die like they try to frame. That was warfare 20 years ago, because this already isn't happening much in the status quo. So soldiers in modern warfare are people standing in the back lines deciding where they should be sending their tanks, how to raid a compound. So the number of casualties is actually already very low within the military itself in the status quo. This is why you see the US making like a huge deal nowadays about any soldier dying, even if it's like one soldier dying, right? So if you look at when the last like American soldier died in Ukraine, it's probably like a year ago, right? And very notably, even if this is not warfare in the status quo, this is where it's going in the very short future. Because like both teams in the top have recognized, human lives are incredibly valuable. So here's why we're actually able to reduce human deaths. It's not the fact that humans are dying, it's the fact that enemies are more likely to die as a result of fighting against humans. This is to say, when you have two parties in which preserving yourself, like your life, is the most important thing, you have to do things like shoot to kill because it means you are able to save yourself. So this looks like when the American soldiers raided bunkers in Iraq, they shot its residents on sight because they thought there were people in relationship with ISIS, but instead they killed civilians, right? They killed tons of civilians. But on our side, when there's a drone coming through these tight tunnels, tunnels, they'll have the time to analyze the situation instead of shooting because losing a drone isn't worth killing innocent civilians. And notice this explicitly takes on the op claim here on like how the civilians are less likely to die. On our side, gas attacks won't happen because it's not the only option. On our side, there's far more rational decision making and precise decision making. So wars are far more likely to be ended faster and kill less people because they're actually efficient and don't fail to poorly trained soldiers. On our side, there's far less deaths on a macro level when shooting to kill isn't your only choice. I think that's the reason why we reduce like casualties, right? But then I want to talk about spillover effects of investment in the military. So if you take a look at investment in the military historically and look at like your daily lives, you like see tons of things that were first created for the military, right? So take a look at like GPS, like literally look at the internet, look at satellite communication, look at like advanced fabrics, materials, etc., etc. Like ovens were developed in World War II for like military radars for Pete's sake, right? These things would have never happened on opposition side of the house in the future because there's far less demand or even no realization that you could actually do these things. And even if they like eventually do get to the point where these things are invested, they happen far faster on our side. So you might have a lot of incentives to invest like lithium ion batteries for cars, but that investment is so incredibly uncertain because no one knows if it will actually work, if it will actually work on a mass scale, if people are willing to switch to it, etc. Right? But militaries like the US are willing to invest in a lot of these things and put tons of money into it, even if it gives them a small technological uphead in war, right? On our side of the house, you probably get huge amounts of investment in like things like lithium ion tech for battery. That's incredibly good, right? And I think here's the weighing mechanism against hot path. There's a deadlock in opening that OG never resolved with casualties. We broke that when we told you how casualties are actually going to happen going forward. But even if you don't buy into our vertical extension in this round, and the casualties are somewhat symmetric on both sides of the house, because if OO is correct that wars are likely to last longer, we win this round because investment in things like clean battery technology affects the entire world. So investments in these things spill over to society as a whole. I think it's a far bigger story than just war. And so far as we're able to provide solutions to things like climate change through these investments, and that's a unique way of doing so because there's such a high risk in investment. I think that's the weighing metric you should weigh this round on. For all these reasons, so proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for those fine remarks, and I'll call upon the member of opposition to open up their case. You hear.
Okay, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. The fundamental place of closing opposition in this round is that the inherent nature of robots exists to make wars difficult and unjust, so happy to oppose. A couple things in the round today. Number one, I'll be refuting the general things that we get from closing government and the member of government's push with some integrated refutation further on in my speech, and then I'll be going into my substantial extension on accountability and changing views of politicians and leaders across the world. But first, into some refutation from what we get from closing government. First, what I hear from them is that they prove in a vertical extension why there will be a reduction of casualties on their side of the house. And they say that, because they said that because it is such a high investment, like in terms of like monetary for these countries to pursue, these countries will thereby be less incentivized to start wars. But we believe that large countries, for example, like people have like billions of dollars, we think that they are able to afford such costs, especially when they're blinded by things like nationalism and believe that there is something to be had, to believe that the trade-off will eventually succeed itself if they were to successfully invade a neighboring country or successfully invade an enemy country. And so the second thing that we get from them is just generally about less deaths. And they say that robots won't kill civilians because they're able to make that trade-off, that it's not worth like a loss of the drone, it's not worth a loss of the unit. And I think that for the countries to be ruthless enough to start a war, even despite the risk that closing government acknowledges, we think that they will also program. We think that it is likely that they will also program the robots to shoot to kill, because killing civilians, like it or not, is the easiest way to win a war because it sends the message of superiority and it sends the message of magnitude. We believe that their point ultimately falls on that basis. So moving into my extensions then, number one on changing views. I think what's important here to understand is that countries with the most amount of money are those who are willing to like produce robots and those who are willing to engage with wars. Countries like a little bit of framing here. These look like countries like China and Russia, who have volatile relationships with international enemies and are willing to make that trade-off, like I mentioned, in refutation. And number two, the reason why war is not more common in these countries is for a variety of reasons, but one of them is because it's taxing on human resources. It's taxing on things like conscripting soldiers or recruiting a fleet of like human soldiers, right? And we think that government motion essentially like betrays this and allows for more war to continue. Why? Because when robots are the medium of conflict, politicians and leaders of the said countries are more willing to weigh robots over human life. That is to say, to them, robots are a simple and prospectively ethical instrument and weapons. They devalue the general cost of utilizing these robots, and they weigh them under human life and believe it is more efficient to send out robots. And so what does this look like? Number one, very simply, it looks like more wars, because large countries don't have to worry about like amassing fleets or conscripting officers. Their fingers on the trigger, right? And their fingers on the trigger, and they're willing to deploy these troops because they believe that the loss is ultimately minimized, because they're not losing human soldiers at the end of the day. They're just losing hunks of metal that are replenishable to them. And number two, these countries are less likely to forfeit or call quits during the war, right? And this has been like pretty big contention around so far, but I'd like to mention that these robots, like as has already been characterized, don't have like inherent feelings, right? They're unable to negotiate or represent their countries. So we believe that these type of things, when robots are the only ones on the battlefield, this stagnates progression, and it stagnates like the course of the war. It will extend wars longer. And number three, when so much robots need to be replenished, presumably this needs to come from somewhere. This is something that is mentioned by nearly all teams in the round, but they never truly recognize how it affects the people, right? This has one of two foreseeable results. Number one, that millions are poured into war weapons. Even Prime Minister and like the rest of government bench acknowledges that the existence of robots introduces new costs. This means that more government money is funneled to this effort, and this looks like there's less funding for people on the home front. There's less funding for the places that are actually being attacked by like enemy soldiers, right? And this looks like worse quality of life. And number two, someone needs to be making these robots. We think that this looks like this country's interning millions of their citizens. It looks like long labor days, and because of high monetary investment of actually creating these things, it looks like relatively unpaid work. And note, this directly conflicts with what proposition tells you that that on their side of the house they will have a better quality of life for their civilians. Truly, they won't. And so the second facet of this argument is relatively about accountability. Couple pieces of framing here. In the status quo, after each war, there comes war crimes, right? Where people are persecuted. And these trials are principally important because they ensure justice is given to the victims, justice is given to the lives lost. And government prevents this from happening on their side. At the very least, they prevent them from happening fluently. They don't allow for the stakes of war to be properly concluded. Why is this? The reason for this is because autonomous robots are not able to be persecuted, right? In the status quo, we don't like arrest the gun, right? We arrest the shooter. But on government side, there is no clear shooter. The engineer who might have like created the model of the robot isn't always at blame, because more likely than not, during like war efforts, national scientists are coerced to help the war effort, right? But what about the people who instruct these robots? These robots are autonomous, and likely they receive general instructions remotely. This means that there is no clear hierarchy or military system that allows for the blame to be pinpointed on a select group of individuals. On a government's best case, the national president or leader or whatever, and a few high-ranked military officers will take the blame. But what about the dozens and like nearly hundreds of other generals that cause for millions of lives to be lost, not to mention other high-ranking military officers who use Fall Guys to take the blame for them? So happy to oppose.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. I now call upon the government whip to close out their side. Hear, hear.
Okay. I would like to have my POIs verbally, please. Okay. My time. Wait, sorry. Before I start, trigger warning for a slight mention of rape and also some excessive violence during wars. If that is problematic, feel free to exit the room. Great. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. I would like to forward two themes in my speech today. First, I'm going to talk about civilian death and massacre, and secondly, I'm going to talk about technological developments and how we're also able to take a separate path to victory and win in that aspect. Firstly, then, let's talk about civilian deaths. So, OG says that this spares things like PTSD, displacement of people, and lives. And note that OG limits their own case by solely focusing on the people that are directly affected within the military. For example, like the nurses and medical workers, like the soldiers. They assume that because robots exist in place of soldiers, the soldiers are then spared of this trauma. Sam takes this case a massive step further through two things. Firstly, he importantly notes that shooting to kill is now no longer your only choice because your drone has less value than a civilian, and there are likely, as CO has ignored, lots of international laws and scrutiny and pressure for you to sacrifice your drone in order to save civilian lives. But moreover, you're probably not going to be programming these robots to shoot to kill. And this is because it's very hard to teach a robot to differentiate between allies and enemy humans, especially if you're, for example, of the same race, especially if you're moving and your face is blurry. This is very risky, and it's optically bad to put the risk of your own people and the possibility of your own people to be shot by your own robots. Simply because with the existence of autonomous robot soldiers, actual human people who are working within the military are probably going to be a lot rarer and hence a lot more important to the entire operation. So the fact that your people can be put in danger due to a program that is telling them to kill civilians means that your people are also more likely to die. So this means that there is likely to be some sort of system put in place which tells the robot to specifically not shoot civilians or shoot humans in general, because the people or the things that they are fighting on the battlefield are other robots and not necessarily people, hence the motion. Now, CO says that there is so much money going towards the front that there's not enough for the rest of the country. But note that this is just like a repeating trend with a bunch of wars. Like people starve during wars because countries are spending so much money towards the war effort. I'm not really sure why this is exclusive. But even in our worst case scenario, in which let's buy what CO and O says about more civilians dying and less morality, I would argue that at least it'll be fast and quote unquote ethical killing. Sam tells you what happens during the wars. Things like rape. There's specific killing of children for the sake of ethnic cleansing, using them for horrid human experiments. So why was the Japanese occupation of Nanjing called rape of Nanjing? Because it was the fact that it was done incredibly gruesomely and that they were toying with human life. So if this were to happen on both sides of the house, at least we're able to minimize the suffering and dehumanization, because like robots can't rape people. Robots cannot take their time trying to kill people. I think on this metric, in our worst case scenario, at least we're able to better the deaths and the way that they die. Then we go into this smaller clash about like the frequency of wars, which both opposition teams touch upon. O says that wars drag on for longer and that governments don't want to end them because civilians aren't dying. Four responses to this. Firstly, this knifes their own idea that robots aren't going to spare lives. If they don't spare lives, then a lot of casualties will occur and hence the governments will want to forfeit. But secondly, you say that these robots are very expensive. Therefore, it is immensely costly, more costly than in status quo to send robots to war, and therefore monetarily disincentivized. But thirdly, governments are disincentivized from war because of optics, the fact that they have to tax their civilians a lot to provide that cost. Fourthly, it's the fact that the global economy falls into shambles because of sanctioning and destruction of important economic hubs. Therefore, wars are just unlikely to exist on both sides of the house. And this is what happens when there is a war in the small case. CO says that there will be more wars because they aren't losing soldiers. This is derivative O. Moreover, they say they're not going to forfeit. You can't argue that they won't forfeit while saying that robots aim to kill civilians in order to end wars faster. This is really confusing. Now, there's this quick claim about like who ends wars. This is a major O claim. I think this is pretty useless because in their deputy, they wash out the fact that on both sides of the house, there's a power imbalance. Let's move quickly on to the second clash, which was never talked about technological developments. Sam argues that tech advancements occur rapidly through the war, especially with massive militaries like the US who are willing to invest lots and lots of money. Argues that they would reach this step one day. But firstly, we're able to win on time because we just reached this step faster. But secondly, this uniquely incentivizes governments like the US, who spends $800 billion annually on military to spend their money to a place that helps society. We're so proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. I now call upon the opposition whip to close out the round. Hear, hear.
Okay, let me just set up my timer. Speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Let's first take out CG out of this round, because I think your extension on, for example, just like investment and like how you get new creations just doesn't make much sense for a few reasons. First, on the fact that it does, just because we're not investing into autonomous robots, it doesn't mean that we can't invest onto like new like research and development. We can invest on, for example, different products such as like, oh, how can we heal people faster? How can we like make people fight like better, or etc. and like stuff like that, right? We can still have new technology. I'm unsure towards why you're going to have to just have robots to get this investment. This is just unclear. I just think that falls out of the round because they have never proven exclusively why this has to be through investments of robots, right? So what we tell you that still happens is that, like, for example, just because robots are not fighting wars, there's still probably investment on AI, for example, to recruit more like information, such as like just knowing the geographical terrain of like different landscapes or like different countries. This will still help these countries fight war better, just like stuff like that, right? I just don't understand what their whole point out there was about. Then let's just talk about the key things that we tell you. The key thing that we tell you, which is the only team, is accountability. This is to say, as thus far, as many teams already acknowledged that war is going to happen anyways, like deaths are going to happen anyways. And for example, even like what like CG talks about, like very atrocious scenes and gruesome scenes will happen. We're able to still bring some kind of solace to people. This is to say that things are like going to be held accountable just due to the fact that you're going to like not just blame it on the robot, just blame it on the fact that, hey, someone programmed it wrong, some like accident happened, etc. Because I'm still unsure towards, like, after all these speeches from government, how these guidelines look like, what kind of reinforcements you actually get. What we tell you then is that these guidelines are extremely frail, just due to the fact that on both sides of the house, you still get war, you still get, for example, people killing each other, still get gruesome scenes, you still probably get civilians being shot in the seas in like the middle of like a crossfire. This is to say, on our side of the house, we're able to better bring peace to people after these things happen. Note that we're the only team that talks about the after effects of war. This is to say that there's, like, for example, less like precedents of doing war because you get persecution and like leaders get persecuted. This is not good. People, like leaders, are going to be less emphasized, less like wanting to commit like war crimes, less wanting to like program like huge robots and just doing all of this. This is what happens in status quo. People just don't go out and war naturally, don't kill people randomly, just because one, they have morals, two, they don't want to face like huge consequences. This is to say, on like a very like intuitively, the opposition, like the government bench, is going to get a bad precedent. People are going to do bad things. What's the second thing we tell you then? The second thing that we tell you is the fact that you have a change of views. This is to say, when you like put millions of dollars into these robots, there's no way that these countries decide not to use them and just let them rot to waste. What does it mean then? This is to say that we already showed to you that now there's a change of views. These robots don't cost human lives, so it's like a lot more moral. And then the second thing is that, like, you still want to make use of something that you invested into. Note that like the half of the CG case is about investment. I'm unsure towards why people are going to invest if they haven't had any tests on why this is work, why this like robot is so powerful, etc. What does it mean then? This is to say that these robots are going to take like very large scale attacks. You're probably going to do like bad things. You're going to have like some sort of effect. Otherwise, I don't even know why the government bench exists, because they never told you what these robots can do and what they can't do. What we tell you then is that these robots are likely to, one, just like take on good attacks, right? For example, they might kill, like they might bomb some things, they might have some sort of weapon, they must have some sort of weapon to have an actual war effect, to actually have anything actually happen. And how do we like actually weigh over our opening then? Because our opening note that they just tell you that like, oh, killing is bad, and then like they have like this very circular thing that like CG rightfully points out about how killing is bad and war, etc. But like you get more deaths on like government, so therefore like basically like war ends faster. But like they haven't shown to you why this is so terribly bad for your average civilian. What we tell you then is that just due to the fact that these like machines are going to be programmed, there has to be mistakes that will happen. Technical problems are inevitable. There's a large chance of just bad things happening, such as like exploding, like killing a random civilian, etc. This is to say that these effects are going to be much more amplified because you're able to blame it on people. There's no accountability. There's no actual way to keep sort of like these things in sort them out. Then what's our impact and how do we win over like OG? OG just basically tells you that, hey, like there's less war crimes. They don't give you any mechanisms on why this is the case, just due to the fact that robots don't magically appear. People still have to make them. Programming is probably still something that's very evident. Then what does it mean on our side of the house? What it means then is that you have less of this blame. You have to take things into control. You have to, like, for example, do things in a more casual way. Also note that we get negotiations, which is what like opening misses out on. Because wars don't end because people get killed. It ends also because of the fact that you get like like some sort of negotiation, something that works for both sides of the house. Note that death is something that both sides want to avoid. They don't want to spend economy. They don't want to spend like millions of dollars killing each other for no use, right? What it means by then is that each side wants to get something in return. There's a conflict and they want to solve it, right? What happens on our side of the house exclusively on CO is the fact that you're able to get these type of negotiations because only through robots they can't negotiate. They don't have as much of a sense. And the second thing is that even if they are able to negotiate, we're telling you that it's very unlikely to be accountable, unlikely to be done under just manners. How do we win this round? Why we tell you that you're able to account for things and take things into a better place after war? We still get innovations. We're able to help people in a very large scale. So proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I thank everyone in the round for an incredibly high quality debate. Thank you all. Good round. And we'll see you all at the award ceremony. Judges are going to go deliberate now, and of course, as usual, the winner of the gold finals will be revealed at the award ceremony, along with, I hear, a very, very special prize. All right. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Good round, guys.